Okay, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the webinar. Today, we're going to talk about personalization. We call it the secret weapon in direct selling. We're going to talk for about maybe 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to fill it out with a Q&A at the end. But in the meantime, if you do have any questions that are coming up for you, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. And when we get to that point, we'll have a whole bank of questions to answer for you. This presentation, or a version of this, was originally done about a month ago at the USDSA's conference. We led a workshop with myself and the CTO of Nu Skin, covering most of the topics that we'll talk about here, and there'll be a couple of other things that are newer content. So let's get started, and we'll move our way through. So I'd like to start with a question. What does this look like to you? Well, this is the growth of Amazon. And personalization is credited to drive 30% of Amazon's revenue. What is this one? Interesting enough, this one's Netflix. And personalization is what drives 75% of Netflix's content viewed. We're going to talk about Netflix and Amazon and go a little bit deeper as we move forward. One more of these. What's this? If you notice the seed and the A and the B, you'll know it's some kind of a startup, not a startup anymore. It's Uber's growth from seed until today. Also strongly driven by personalization. So we're going to talk about three things today. We're going to talk about competition with the gig economy. What does that really mean? What are gig economy companies doing that direct selling companies can learn from to take cues on how to create these more personalized experiences? Secondly, we're going to talk about how personalization is everywhere. This is not really an option anymore. We're kind of at the place where it's now normal, right? Kind of like with the rise of mobile, you got to the first iPhone, second iPhone. By the time you got into the third and fourth version of the iPhone, it was pretty much a thing you had to do. Personalization is now at that point. And then thirdly, the concept of lifetime value of a rep or lifetime value of a customer versus recruiting, or what we call the ratio of your cost to acquire a customer to the lifetime value that you get from them for the cost of acquiring them. So let's dig right into it. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the gig economy. Something I've been talking about for years. We know this, direct selling isn't the only side hustle anymore. And this is really the big one for us, right? There are so many new income opportunities now that exist that did not exist before. This is not a surprise to anyone. What I think has surprised people is the rapid growth of this space and how really good these companies have gotten at not just acquiring people to do their gigs, not just acquiring customers, but as we'll see later, also being able to keep those customers and really maximize the value that they give to their giggers and therefore that they get from their giggers. So let's look at some demographics here. We're going to look at how direct selling is comparing in demographics, and we're going to launch a little bit of a poll here. We want to ask you guys some questions. The first question is what percentage of your field is female? So we're going to put this out right now. You should see something popping up on your screen. We'd be curious to see if our gut reaction or how close you are to the regular overall numbers in direct selling. And while you're filling these out for the next minute or so, take a look at the numbers here. You'll see that Uber drivers tend to skew overwhelmingly male. I don't think that's a big surprise to everyone. Upwork's about 50-50. Etsy's the huge one, right? Even more than direct sellers. My wife actually has an Etsy store. She was an Uber driver as well, 86%. And then let's look at Airbnb, also kind of skewing a little bit more female, but 50-50. My family also has an Airbnb business, and I stayed in an Airbnb this weekend. That was a host who was a teacher, a retired teacher. Okay, so the poll has come in. Let's see if we can end it here. It looks like, wow, that's interesting. Some of you are saying that your field is 50%, 25 to 50% female. Some of you are saying, two of you are saying 51 to 75. And of course, the over 75% is one of you. So it's about 50% are saying 51 to 75% are female. Interesting, we're gonna end that. I'm going to share the results, and then we're going to do the next one, which is, hold on, I've got to turn this one off. And we're going to get to the next one, which is the age range of your field. So let's launch that. And let's look, like, do you guys know the age range of your field and what kind of generational issues you're dealing with? Are you primarily going to be baby boomers? Are you going to be more on the Gen X side, which is where I'm like right at the cusp? I'm right on the edge of Gen X and Gen Y, or millennials. Or are you starting to get more young? And what's going on with Gen Z? And are you looking at that? So let's look at that. So far, 67% of you are saying 35 to 44, 45%, I'm sorry, 33% are 45 to 54. What is the age range with the biggest representation in your field? And when we say field, we really mean reps and customers. So if that helps be any more clear. While we're moving, we'll go into the next slide here, and let's look at this. An interesting thing we found here with direct selling versus the rest of the gig economy. A 10% decrease in the workforce in direct selling from 2015 to 2017 with this 74% female group. But in the gig economy, we're looking at a 6.7% increase. So something's going on, right? Something is happening that these gig companies are doing to increase the number of people doing them, while direct selling is seeing this pretty significant contraction. All right, let's share the result of this poll. So only a few of you voted, but it looks like that 35 to 44 age range is going to be your predominant range, which is really going to be kind of that Gen Xer and a little bit of Gen Y, which is really interesting. Good to see. Now let's look at the challenges that we're facing in the gig economy. First of all, let's compare monthly churn. Let's look at Uber drivers in 2015. Now remember, we're looking at monthly churn. This is a number that I'm going to challenge you on later. This is a number that very few companies in direct selling actually keep track of, which kind of strikes me as a bit odd, because if you think about it, your monthly recruiting numbers are something that's very, very important to you. But if we're not looking at monthly churn next to it, right, we might have some questions that we'll get back to that earlier. So looking at 2015 Uber numbers, they were losing about 40% of their drivers every month, pretty substantial. So they started putting a lot of work into that. In 2019, they're down to 13% monthly churn, which is significantly lower than direct selling's churn, which has been pretty consistent now, for many years, that average about 18 to 25% monthly churn, meaning that every rep and every customer who bought something from you, out of everyone, 25% of everyone that bought something from you, whether they're a rep or a customer this month, if you're an average company, about 20 or 23% of those people are buying this month for the last time. Which means that if you're not recruiting more than that number, you're very likely to start seeing a decline in the near future, if you're not there already. Now let's look at what Uber actually did to change this. They started with this challenge of new driver attrition. And the solution was alerting new drivers when they're halfway to earning a bonus. Basically their first 25 rides. So a lot of times people are moving their way towards something. We do something like this in direct selling, right? People are on their way towards something. We want to alert them, let them know that they're getting somewhere, that things are happening for them. And the impact of this was much higher retention after those 25 rides, because they knew that if they could get somebody to just do 25 rides, that once they break through that kind of glass ceiling, the chances of them staying around for a long time become a lot higher. We kind of know that in direct selling as well, right? That first kind of 90 days is that number for us, right? If we can get people past that first 90 days, we're a lot more likely to keep them a lot longer. The next thing Uber was looking at was drivers logging off early. They would be working only a small number of hours, and then maybe they decide that they want to get off and stop working. But what they created was these personalized micro goals, realizing that if a driver had set a goal to make $100 and they had only made 75 so far, or maybe only made 80 or 90, they could pop something up saying, are you sure you really want to stop now? Because if you just go a little bit more, you're going to hit this goal that you set for yourself. And as a result, this personalization created a much higher rides complete per driver rate, which meant that the drivers are making more money and Uber doesn't need to recruit as many more drivers to fulfill the demand, right? So everybody wins. The next one was bad driver experience. Now this is a really big one. Uber's been doing this really since day one, but they have this new feature where they're really upping the ante as of May this year, which is this concept of making sure that every ride, every driver, and not just the driver, really the passengers too, but especially the driver is getting rated by every passenger so that they can make sure that these people that are out there in the millions, right, in your brand, the thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people out there representing your brand to the world every day, they want to get some data back of, are they doing a good job representing us? Because they know that if that's not happening, it's going to damage their reputation, which is going to make it harder to recruit in the future and going to make it harder to get customers. And this is something that direct selling hasn't really looked at, and something that we recommend very highly is introducing this concept, not necessarily of banning people, but at least getting the data to know what type of experience are our distributors giving people and who's really doing a great job at it, who isn't, what are the qualities that we could be thinking about in terms of understanding how our brand is being portrayed by these independent reps all over the world every day. The next one is displaying the next fare before the current ride has ended, right? So knowing that before this ride that you're going to be making money on is over, you already know there's another one waiting for you where you're going to make even more money. And creating these personalized suggestions, not only of that you have a next ride coming, but where to go into an area where there might be surge pricing, where you're more likely to make even more money, to create that motivation to fill in gaps, service area gaps, so they can get more drivers to a place where people are demanding rides right now. And so filling in this kind of demand gap by making personalized suggestions to drivers. They're not going to tell a driver in Manhattan to try to go to southern New Jersey. They're going to create something for people that are really close by to get there easily. So let's move into the next section, which is the rise of personalization. So let's just use Amazon as an example. I thought I'd use a kind of a playful example. Let's say that you're an Amazon shopper and you have this maybe like a rubber ducky obsession, and you love buying rubber duckies, so you're looking at rubber duckies all the time. Well, Amazon might look at you, take all this data about your shopping behavior, and realize, you know what, if this person likes rubber duckies, you know what they probably also like? Bath balls. And so let's also market some bath balls to them so that we can increase their cart size. And we can think about them spending more money with us, getting more things that they would like and be happy with than they would have if we just let them buy rubber duckies and nothing more. There's a lot of this data that exists within direct selling companies of what people are buying that are indicative of what other of your products they might also like, that very few people are taking advantage of. The idea of how to increase that cart size, how to get people to try new products and proliferate more loyalty and more, and then buying more, spending more of their wallet share on you. And this personalization that Amazon does is primarily based on just a few factors. Purchase history, so what is it that you've been buying in the past? More importantly, what are you looking at? So you always are looking at things that you might be interested in buying and not always buying them. What are those things? What are you rating, right? Because the things that you're taking time to write a rating about are things that you care more about than things that you don't. The things that are more emotionally intense, emotionally important to you. So those things tell us something about you. And then really importantly, what are other buyers that buy things like you, look at things like you, rate things like you? What are they buying? Because that might be indicative of what else they might want to show you, things that you might want to buy. So you think about it, it really looks like 4 different categories, but there are many subcategories, and this can add up to easily hundreds or thousands of data points about any individual, adding up to 100 billion gigs of user data that Amazon is using to analyze and drive a lot of this personalization. You'd be surprised how much data you have. Another interesting thing I thought that you guys would notice is if you have a Kindle, you might be doing what I do, which is highlight passages, things that you want to be able to go back to and remember about that book or that article that you're reading. Well, Amazon reads those, And they use those to be able to recommend products to you. So you can see this example of a highlight happens to use the word faith a lot. So if they're using that, you can see how Amazon might be thinking that you are more of a faith-driven person. Maybe they want to recommend more faith-driven books to you as an example of things that you might want to buy. And that's really the kind of funny part about Amazon, right? Is that this whole idea of like, what do you want before you want it? How do we put things in front of you that maybe you weren't even thinking about or that you were thinking about in the past, that as soon as you see it, you're like, oh yes, that's exactly what I wanted. And you buy it and it's at your door as quickly as possible. Price discrimination is the next thing you want to talk about. This is one of my favorite books. It's called The Lean Startup. It's actually one of the two main books of our company culture. We ask all of our new team members to read it. We give it away to customers on our first strategy day with them. It's a really great book that doesn't just apply to startups. Some of the biggest corporations in the world are now using these techniques to drive innovation a lot faster. I was buying this book, and I still buy this book for lots of people. What I noticed was I'd go on my Amazon app, I'd get in there, do a real quick one-time buy, barely look at the price because it was what I paid for last time. But then what would start happening is as my frequency of buying this book would go on, I would start to notice that the price was going up. And maybe it was $14.42 last time, but now it's like $15.45. And the next time it was like $16.99. And the next time it was $17.99. And I reached a point where I was like, no. I'm not going to pay $18 for this book when I knew I was paying $15 for it, 2 weeks ago. And I'd stop and I would not make that purchase that one time. Then I go back 24 hours later, surprisingly enough, the price is lower. This is called price discrimination, where they're kind of guessing what they think people are going to want to pay for this product and testing out different pricing strategies with different people in dynamic real time, right? So Amazon's changing prices 2.5 million times a day, which is sometimes one item can change price like every 10 minutes. You can come in 10 minutes later, the price will be totally different. Long story short, this has increased profits for them by 25%. And it's another feature of personalization. Let's look at Netflix. Netflix is something that I'm sure almost all of you are users of. You might have, yourself and your spouse or yourself and your kids or your partner's Netflix account. You'll click on one and click on the other, get completely different experiences, right? One might look like this, the other one might look like this. The only thing really the same here is the Netflix logo and the play button, right? The menu and the play button. So this is an example of personalization. And this is critically important to Netflix. This idea of what content are they going to put in front of what person at what time really drives a ton, billions of dollars really, in retention for them. If you think about it, Netflix is really like an auto ship, right? They're a subscription to a product. And just like any product, just like your products, if people aren't consuming them, they're not going to continue to buy them. And so Netflix's job, just like our job, is to make sure that we don't just sell our products to people, but that we give them an experience that makes sure that they're actually consuming those products. Because if they don't consume them, they're not going to buy more. And so by putting products in front of you, or by putting, in this case, content in front of you that's more relevant to you, that you're more likely to resonate with, they have gotten an extremely high retention rate. Who cancels Netflix, right? Nobody. And they've gone through several price increases over the years. Nobody cancels their Netflix. Now, another thing that you might want to consider here is we're looking at Robert's and we're looking at Alice's, right? Well, maybe we are, and this might be the thing that you think is what's going to happen. And this is where we get tripped up in direct selling a lot of times, is we're not very aware of what behavioral scientists or behavior economists call our subconscious biases. So you might be looking at these two things and thinking, oh yeah, that's definitely would be Robert's and definitely would be Alice's, but what if I were to tell you that it's actually the other way around? What if I were to tell you that this is actually Robert's Netflix and this is Alice's Netflix, right? This might go completely contrary to your cognitive bias. And you really don't have that much information about Robert or Alice. Just we think Robert's a man, we think Alice is a woman, and so we think that Alice would like all the girly stuff and Robert would like all the action, kind of dude stuff. But in this case, it happens to be the other way around. And so we have to be careful about these things in our business, especially since direct selling tends to be a really emotional business where we're dealing with lots of emotional charge and lots of passion, and we want to ride those waves of emotion, but we also don't want to let them crash on us and create these kind of biases that cause us to do actions that we can't necessarily measure in other ways besides how we feel about them. So this is something that Netflix has invested in. They had public prizes where they'd give away $1 million to anybody that could make their algorithm even just a couple of percent more accurate, because they knew that every 1 or 2% they could make that algorithm more accurate in terms of recommending content to people would drive millions of dollars in more revenue for them. They'd be very happy to pay $1 million for 1 or 2% better accuracy. And the next concept really is about segmentation. This is something that we've talked about in direct selling for some time. And I actually believe I've got a question for you here. So I'm going to pop this up while I keep talking. So think about this concept of segmentation. In direct selling, we talk about 2 or maybe 3 segments of people, right? We talk about people that are customers, we talk about people that are sellers, and maybe we talk about a difference between a part-time and a full-time seller, right? So maybe we've got 3 different groups of people that we look at. How many groups do you think Netflix has? How many different segments do you think Netflix is working with? So just make a wild guess here. The poll's up on your screen. Challenge you to make a guess here. And think, think every segment is a group of people that you're going to provide some level of personalized experience to. So how many different groups of people do you think Netflix is going to work with that they can provide a personalized level of personalized experience to each group? Here's on the right, you'll see some of the qualities of those groups. Great. Another 10 seconds to vote. A few of you still have left to vote. All right, so a lot of you are getting right on here. I'm going to end it and share it. Good job, you 3 in the 60%. You nailed it. Netflix is working with 1,300 different segments. They call them taste communities. So maybe that's a little bit of a signal to us, right? Maybe that's a little bit of a sign that we've got to get a little bit more sophisticated with our data analysis so that we can start working and providing a little bit of a more customized experience for people. Maybe this is a sign that that kind of legacy way of looking at direct selling as how do we create one system that we give and train everyone on to try to get everyone to do the one duplicatable, repeatable thing. And that's what we drive through our field. Maybe that model is starting to get a little antiquated. Maybe we really need to be thinking about who are the people in front of us and what's the best level of experience that's going to be right for them to maximize their individual potential and to get their individual lifetime value to be higher. And we'll talk about this more as we dig in. So long story short, we've got, just get this out of my way here, Netflix with an under 10% annual churn, right? An average direct selling company will probably have something like, if you look at it in raw numbers, 200% annual churn, which means that you'll have to recruit however many people you start a year with, you'll have to recruit twice that many people in a year in order for you to stay flat or grow a little bit. This is turning into billions of dollars in revenue for Amazon, and for Netflix and for all these companies that do this. So why personalize? Well, if we think about the lifetime value, right? Lifetime value is the concept of how many dollars is an individual rep or an individual customer going to drive for us within their life cycle. So we took all this energy to get them. We took all this energy to train them. Their upline is working with them. All this energy that goes into getting them to produce. How many dollars of production do we get out of them before they churn out? That's their lifetime value. And what we find is that 93% of companies with advanced personalization strategies are boosting revenue significantly. So it works. This is why companies are spending a lot of money on this. This is why they're making big investments here. And this is why a lot of these companies are winning. The ones that are winning are the ones that are doing personalization. So let's move now into the third area, life cycles over recruiting. So this is what we find a lot. It's a complicated procedure to go out there and recruit. It gets more and more challenging, all the time. The bigger and bigger your company gets, the higher and higher the bar gets, the more and more complicated it becomes. And we spend a lot of time looking at it, and we do need to, right? But on the other end, we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about what does it take to keep somebody that we spent all this time and energy getting? What is that ratio of the costs that we put in to get this person into our business or get this customer to buy from us the first time, and versus that lifetime value that we're going to get from that person. And so oftentimes keeping customers ends up being a lot less effort than getting them, but we don't see that much effort happening to keep customers in the direct selling space. And how much better is it? Well, if we look at it, for most companies, it's 6 to 7 times more expensive to get a new customer than it is to keep one. And so we end up looking at this. And if you don't have these two numbers, I could not make a higher recommendation for you to do as soon as you get off this webinar than to go get these two numbers. I'm sure your monthly recruiting number is something you can get maybe right off the top of your head or click 1 or 2 buttons and get, but your monthly churn number is the important number. And let me tell you right now how to get that number. And this is something you can walk away with and get to right away. What you want to do is you want to go look back into your historical sales, and you want to look at, and we can send you a worksheet that'll let you do this really easily into a simple spreadsheet. But essentially what you're doing is you want to look at go back 3 or 4 months. So you can look at all the people that ordered 3 or 4 months ago, and then the last 12 months before that. Look at how many people in every one of those months ordered in that month and then never ordered again. What number of people was that historically? Then take those last 12 months that you can get that number for. You'll probably have to go back and start at least 90 days before today so you can know that those people have actually churned. And average up that number over that 12-month period, and that's the number of people in an average month that are ordering for the last time. Put that number right next to your monthly recruiting number, and that is your super duper easy way to know whether you're trending towards growth or not. The number of people that are buying for the first time in a month versus the people that are buying for the last time in a month. That's your growth. And when you put those two numbers next to each other, I think in most cases you might end up quite surprised by how close to your monthly recruiting number your monthly churn number is. And for those of you in sales, that might be why you're working so hard. Because if you've got to recruit, if 90 or 95% of your recruiting is just playing catch up for churn, it's really only that last 5% that's actually equaling your growth. And that's a heavy weight to carry on your shoulders. It's also really volatile, and it means you're skating on really thin ice. Because if your recruiting ever starts to hiccup a little bit and slow down, it takes these companies into these nosedives, and that's where you see that phenomenon of pop and drop that people talk about in the direct selling industry. Now let's look at why customers leave. The funny thing that's interesting here is that the number one reason why most people leave a company is because they don't believe that the company cares about them. And we in direct selling have a really strong competitive advantage here because we've got these communities of people that we build, and we can drive that care. But it still is surprising on exit interviews, and when you look at churn, how many people end up leaving a direct selling company still feeling like they really didn't have people that care about them, that their people in their upline, or that the company was trying to drive them toward doing the business in a way that wasn't the way that they wanted to do it, or that wasn't a way that was comfortable or really best for them. And that's where personalization comes in. So the bottom line is increasing customer retention rates by only 1% or by 5% can increase your profits by as much as 95%. And what we found in direct selling to be true, looking at now 17 million life cycles over about 7 years of data, we found that for every 1% that you can get your retention to be better over 12 months, that will equal somewhere between a 5 and a 7 or maybe even 8% lift for you, depending on how strong your recruiting is. The better your recruiting is, the more money you'll make from retention, which is kind of a funny thing to think about. And that's where this golden metric comes in. Another thing that I would recommend you go out and look at and keep track about, your cost to acquire a customer. This is going to be calculated by the following. 1, look at all of the money that you're spending on your marketing and sales team, your marketing budget, all your marketing employees, and all your sales employees and everything that they cost, plus any one-time bonuses that you might be paying out when someone brings someone in who bought for the first time. Take all that money together and divide it, that you spend in a month, divide it by the number of new buyers. That's your cost to acquire a customer. So let's say it costs you $10, to acquire a customer. The next thing is what's that average customer's lifetime value going to be? And that's your ratio, right? And you want that ratio to be as big as possible. So if you're spending $1 and then the lifetime value of someone is only $1, not too awesome. If you're spending $1 and people's lifetime value is $100, awesome. That means you have a 1 to 100 CAC to LTV ratio. And that's really a function, that number is really a big thing. If you're a public company, that number is going to be one of the primary influencers of your company's market cap. If you're a private company, that number is going to be one of the primary influencers of your company's value. So if your company's ever thinking about exiting or selling, or in any way where the value of that company is going to be something, your CAC to LTV ratio is going to be one of the biggest things to be looking at. And I highly recommend that you start tracking this if you're not already. So what's the bad news for direct selling as we start to wrap up? We'll get to the bad news and the good news. The bad news is the old ways aren't working. Pushing people to do what we think they should do and setting goals of what we think everybody should have don't work anymore. It needs to be more personalized to the personal level. That one-size-fits-all approach just isn't working anymore. Next is we got the FTC kind of breathing down our necks, just kind of the way it is. We can get into lots of reasons why that is, but what we can tell you is that the more personalized you get your experiences to be, means that you're going to get a lot more data and you're going to get a lot more people having some level of success and what success means to them, not necessarily what it means to you in your business, which is going to drive a lot less scrutiny from government regulators, because you're going to turn out way happier people that are coming in and out of your business. And it's going to help you recruit, it's going to help your brand value, and it's going to keep your regulators away much more easily. This is a long conversation we can get deeper into if you want to ask some questions in the Q&A. So what's the good news? Good news for direct sellers? Well, the first thing is we've got to personalize, and we can do this. We can create personalized experiences for our buyers and our sellers. And we can do that by treating them like appreciating that they are individuals that bring different sets of skills and desires and amount of time that they're willing to put in and so on to the table. They all have their own unique motivations, and that our motivation for them might not be aligned with what they want. And so what we have as an advantage in direct selling, and why I continue to believe that this market should be 10 times bigger than it is the only tool that every other company we've talked about today has in their toolbox is this AI that can communicate with their customers through a direct digital experience. But what do we have in direct selling? We have that one competitive advantage, which is that we have real human beings with a real human relationship with our other sellers and our other customers. That can lever a lot more influence. That's called word of mouth, right? And so what we have really as an opportunity in direct selling is to combine these two things together. We call it human instinct to the power of AI. Taking that human instinct and that AI, bringing them together to equal more than they ever could do. And this is by enhancing our existing tools. These AIs, these behavioral profiles that all these companies are creating about you, that Netflix has on you, and Amazon and Facebook and Google and so on all have about you. You have enough data right now in your direct selling company, no matter how legacy your stuff is, you have enough data to start with that and to start driving millions of dollars and more revenue through all your different communication channels. And it's something you can do really quickly. The next thing is segmentation. One of the things we offer for our customers is we've broken down these 17 million life cycles. We can take your data, add it into that, and we'll discover that there are basically 10 unique segments across all of your customers and all of your reps. And by understanding what the qualities of each of these segments are, by understanding what type of life cycle they have, and by knowing who's in each one of these segments, you can create much more personalized emails, way smarter promotions, way smarter comp plan changes, way better training that's more appropriate to the right person at the right time, driving a ton more engagement and way more lifetime value for your people by just looking at the segmentation factor alone. And so an example of how this might work is you might identify that someone's in the business builder segment. That might trigger some type of alert to their upline. That might happen through a text message or through Facebook or WhatsApp or WeChat or whatever. We do this all over the world today in 85 different countries. And you might be doing something like this on a blanket term, but now what you'd be doing is sending a one-to-one message or sending a message only to business builders. And then measuring the engagement of that. If you don't get the engagement that you want, bumping it out into your Salesforce, your CRM, so those people that are lower value would then get an email. And the people that are higher value might get an outbound call from your call center. Call centers and direct selling tend to have a lot of that kind of dipping downtime in the middle of the month because they got to save that bandwidth for the end of the month. You could turn your call center into a revenue driver versus just a cost center. And lastly, if none of that works, then you go for that kind of Hail Mary offer, that special discount. So you end up with all these different tools of engagement that you can use, making that promotion or that discount or that kind of eating into your margin only a last ditch effort when nothing else has worked. So think about that as a sort of a journey type of way of looking at of how you can create a more specific experience for people, just kind of a high level way of looking at it. Now, as we wrap up here, I want to leave you with this quote from Jeff Bezos, which is, "Speed matters in business. What's dangerous is not to evolve." One of the main fundamental principles as Amazon is this concept of a bias for action. What they're saying is, if you're spending a lot of time thinking about stuff, you're in trouble. What we want you to spend time with is doing things, trying things, trying to figure out the smallest way that you can affect behavior of people, affect the behaviors of our customers, cart size, whatever they're doing at Amazon. Try it quickly, probably fail the first time around, learn from something and iterate and go through that as quickly as possible, because what they've learned and what that Lean Startup book also talks about is this concept of whatever kind of hallucination we have about what our customers want or what's really going to work is probably only partially right. And we don't know what parts of it are wrong until we get it out in the wild, put it in front of the market and see how they react, measure that, learn from it, make a tweak, and then go around again. And your company's ability to do these, what we call build, measure, learn cycles, is going to be directly proportionate to your ability to innovate and your ability to compete and stay competitive and keep growing. And so that's it. That's what we've got for you. We're going to open up to questions now. So if you want to click on that Q&A, you're welcome to ask any questions, and I'm happy to answer them for you. Thank you guys for being here. A couple of questions that we could pop up on the screen while we're waiting for your questions are reminding you of a couple of things. What can you do now? First of all, look at that cost to acquire a customer. See if you can work with your finance team. Try to find that number. What is it costing you to acquire a customer today? Next is understand the value of improving it, right? So if you could get that LTV up, how much money would be in the bank for you if you could get that up? We've got an ROI calculator we can send you that'll give you those numbers, and you can build business cases in a matter of seconds with it, give it to you for free. Second is go deeper. Third, go deeper into segmentation. Go into it. Think about your people. Think about breaking them up into segments and how you would create a little bit of a more unique experience for people. Even if it's something as simple as already looking at just an email plan. You know, what different email would go out to people who really only make, you know, a couple $100 every other month versus leaders, right? And being able to know who those people are. And then fourth is collect and save as much data as you can about individuals. And we're getting a question that's come up about this. One of the questions is, how much data do I need? And that's a really great question. What I would say is, if you're sort of medium to large size company, so say, you know, $25 million or more in revenue, and you've been in business for, you know, at least a couple of years, then you've got more than enough data. And the one real litmus test that we usually use for customers on this question is to ask the one question: are you paying your commissions properly and accurately? If the answer is yes, then you already have the fundamental base of data that you need to do most of this work. And anything you can get above that is going to make it better, but is only going to increase that value incrementally. The main chunk of value is coming from the data you already have that you're using to run your commission engine with. The next question we're getting is, let's see here. How can I involve my leaders? Good question. Having leader buy-in is going to be really important to this kind of stuff. And there's going to be a little bit of training necessary, especially if you got a leader base which is very driven by passion and very driven by anecdote, meaning that they're used to deciding what's true and what isn't based on talking to 4 or 5 people in their downline, getting an answer, and then deciding what the truth is for all 20,000 people in their network. Right? There's going to be a little bit of training on how to look at analytics, how to understand data, how to look at what truth is from a data perspective. And this is something that we work with really hard with our customers, is to get their leaders on board, get that buy-in with them really early, and get them starting to look at analytics and sharing numbers with them so that they can start to be looking at data. There's a lot of money for leaders in these type of practices, but it's also going to require them kind of seeing the light in a couple of things and taking a step back from certain practices they're doing and being willing to try new things. You can set up experiments. There's all sorts of things that you can do around involving your leaders. Another thing that some of our customers do is take some of their more kind of progressively minded leaders that are interested in new things and are hungry to learn, and put them into a small group and have them beta test some of these ideas. Have them be there when we present the segmentation models. Have them be there when we're thinking about how to change the training for different groups of people. Next question we're getting is, let's see, how much time would it typically take to look at the data and begin implementing personalization and seeing results? Really good question. So there's 2 parts there, I'll unpack it. Firstly, the question is, how much time does it take to look at the data and kind of get some of that analysis? Well, this is something you need to be able to do really, really fast. You may have an internal team that can do this for you. Generally for us, the way it works is we've got segmentation up and running for a customer 2 to 3 weeks from the time that they get us their data. So the first step is getting that segmentation up and presenting it to everybody so that all the key stakeholders in the company understand what all these different behavioral groups are, what their qualities are, etc. And then following that, we can start to develop a strategy of figuring out where's the lowest hanging fruit for us to start to be able to create more personalized experiences for people. Is it by bifurcating our email strategy into 2 or 3 different types of emails now and sending out different emails to different people? Is it by thinking a little bit about our training so that when someone in segment A is going through their life cycle, what training we give them at what point is a little bit different than someone in segment B? And this type of strategy is something that, again, can be a bit of a trap because, you know, you want to get that bias toward action. You want to find one little thing you can do and then another little one, another little one. You don't want to try to boil the ocean and come up with a big master plan that's going to take you 6 months just to get out there and figure out what you messed up. Right? Which is what we tend to do because we're never right, very rarely right about whatever idea we have, you know, right out of the gate. There's always improvement, there's always learning to be made. So we want to go quickly and we want to release stuff really fast. And then the next part of the question is to begin implementing personalization and seeing results. Well, there's 2 ways you can do that. One I've been talking about, which are by leveraging some of your internal practices. A lot of the larger companies already have a lot on your plate. A lot of times corporate is really kind of stacked up with a lot of initiatives, many things going on at the same time. That's where bringing a partner can help. You know, with us and our customers, we're sending, you know, not just segmentation-based messages, but we go all the way down to the individual level, sending one-to-one messages to people to drive them into more retention and help them support their customer and field. And that's something that's live, you know, 60 days after we get the data and is driving new revenue on day 61. So, you know, working with us or with another partner or internally, I would say that if you're thinking that it's going to take you more than 60 or 90 days to start to see some level of ROI on an effort like this, it's probably too long. And if your internal efforts are going to take you more than that much time, Depending on the size of your company, it's probably going to cost you about 5 to 7 figures a month for every month that you're not doing it, because that's the kind of return that you should be able to be getting if you're a $50 million or above company. And so think about it that way. What's the cost of going slowly versus moving quickly? And so that's the answer to that question. I'll leave us open for another minute. What I will say is, if you're interested in how you can work with your CAC to LTV, if you're interested in that number of that worksheet that we offered you, if you want to build a free business case, please reach out to us. You can email us at Michel is my email, Michel at directtechlabs.com, and we'll set up that consultation for you for free, get in there with you, help you build that business case, and give you a tool that you can build business cases in a matter of seconds with as many scenarios as you want into the future. That'll be just a gift for you. And so you can always reach out to us on that. If there are any other questions, we'll stay open for another minute here. If you need to leave, I'll just put up one more slide. This is an example of the segmentation dashboard that we provide that gives you some metrics on the different behavioral groups. These are the 5 revenue driving groups that we usually find and identify for people. And there's a lot of interesting things to learn here about how your people behave in these different statistically relevant groups. And if you just kind of take a look at this for a minute, you can already see some interesting things. Your numbers will come out a little bit differently, of course. It'll be in the ballpark of this because the swing of behavior across direct selling companies isn't massively large, but you'll have some version of this. You might find it interesting that this casual builders group would probably be the largest group of revenue drivers you have. And you might find that a lot of the training and a lot of the promotions and a lot of things you're doing don't necessarily apply to this group. This group has the shortest lifespan, even though they drive more revenue than any other group. So this is a group that we spend a lot of time in our strategy sessions with customers looking at and digging into. And of course, your numbers will be a little bit different here, but here's a kind of just a random spread of an average across kind of all of our customers. And so if any of this is interesting to you, we'd love to talk to you. We have no obligation. We just want to get to know you a little bit more, see if we can add some value, offer you a business case, offer you some new perspective at how you're looking at your numbers, and see where it goes from there. So we're going to let this webinar end. And I want to say thanks to everyone. We really appreciate you guys taking your time. And we hope to hear from you and stay in touch in the future. All the best.